Good morning, everyone. We have a star panel here. As you can see, on the far left is Bobby Godsell, who many of you would know as a very prominent voice in business and also education. Next to him, Professor Vuyokazi Nomlomo, who is the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Teaching and Learning at the University of Zululand. Then, of course, my favorite professor, right next to her, my other favorite professor, Professor Njabulo and Ndebele, who is the chairman of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, also enormous experience, as you know, in higher education. And then Noncedo, I apologize for mispronouncing your name, Madubedube, who is the General Secretary of Equal Education. We will stick to the hour. This conference has had a habit of running late on everything, but we will we'll do that. So I'm going to start with a question to all of you, and Bobby, I'm just going to ask you to start, and then we come down. Try and be brief, each one of you, if you don't mind, because I need to get through a lot before we turn it over to the audience. So as somebody who studies change for a living, particularly educational change, let me ask you the obvious question: why reading? If you think of all the competing priorities in education, numeracy, coding, and just keeping kids alive in the South African context, basic nutrition, well-being, etc., of all the things you could do, why are we here talking about reading? Bobby?
Well, I mean, the succinct answer is that it's the fundamental skill for acquiring knowledge. But also, by the way, as one of our panel members, I mean, we convened to be concerned about reading for meaning, which certainly sounds impressive. But one of the panel members said she was even more interested in reading for enjoyment. It's very fundamental to human development. And it's impossible to imagine the society achieving any of its other goals without that basic building skill. What's also commendable, I think, is that it's a relatively narrow goal, as the report indicates. We know how people learn to read. We know what tools they need. We know what adult attention they need in the classroom and in the home and in the society. So it's an achievable goal, and I think that's what makes it so valuable.
Thank you, sir. Vuyokazi.
Thank you, Chair. Am I audible? Yes. Yes, in addition to what Bobby is saying, if we're talking about reading, that's life as far as I'm concerned. That's life. Because anyone or any child to be able to participate even in terms of socio-economic development. We have issues in our country, and if they are not literate, they won't be able to function optimally and contribute towards the economic development of our country. So as far as I'm concerned, each and every child should be able to read with meaning, not to back at words, because reading with meaning means that you will be able to engage at different levels with different people, you know, and you'll be able to participate meaningfully in whatever space you get yourself in, whether it's outside, not necessarily inside the classroom. Yes, we need them to read inside the classroom, but at the same time, they must be able to participate within their own communities. We need readers, we need critical thinkers, we need problem solvers. And through reading, that's where the skills are acquired. We need people who are creative. We need people who would be able to contribute towards innovations. And that comes through reading. And if we were to expand on reading, it also determines who you are, your heart. If you can read, if you can't read, I would regard myself, if for example, I would not be able to read the print. I'm blind.
Okay. I love you very much, but you're sounding like my pastor on a Sunday morning. You know,
Yes.
if it's so obvious, why is it not happening?
So why is it?
If reading is, reading is like teenage sex. Everybody talks about it, but nobody does it, right? So if it is so obvious, why is it not happening?
Well, I think there's a number of factors, and I think it's complicated. There's a number of factors that come into play. Yes, it's necessary. the socio-economic environment that we're in, the inequalities. I think you saw the slides that Nick presented to us to say that if you were to look at the children who are unable to read with meaning or for meaning, who are they? They are in quintile 1 schools, where, for example, from the low socioeconomic backgrounds, where there's a lot of surrounded by poverty, unemployment, and no reading print, no materials to read, particularly in African languages. We are having a very big problems because there is no reading materials. And if you look at the graph up there, those learners who can read perhaps are those who are in former Model C schools and from middle class families where reading, they are exposed to reading, and also the culture of reading. I think that's something we need to inculcate.
I'm so sorry, Vuyokazi, because there's so much to get through. But I'm going to just leave this with you as a panel.
Yes.
South Africans tend to think of themselves as exceptional. We're not exceptional. Okay, my PhD research is done in Zimbabwe, in Chinoy, northeast of Harare. They have much worse schools in terms of the things you're talking about, but much better outcomes. I just want to leave it, if you don't mind thinking about that for a moment, because I want to come back to that. Prof, why reading?
Your question reminds me of the preamble to the Constitution, at least a part of it where it says, if I remember, to improve the quality of life of all citizens. And then the next bit says, and to free the potential of every person. So you have on the one hand, all citizens, and on the other hand, every person. There is no community without the person, and there is no person without the community. Now, here I speak as a writer of fiction and essays, applying my mind to issues that confront our society. And I think you'll all agree that, at least I think so, that reading is the one thing that that enhances your self-awareness, because it's you and the book, it's you and whatever text that you are reading, it's you. And you allow yourself at that point the latitude to be taken wherever you want to go by the writer of the book. And what the writers do, either they inform you about facts or they stimulate your imagination to imagine worlds that you have never been to. But at that particular moment that you are traveling through the worlds that they have created, you are outside of yourself, but you're also inside of yourself, from the sense that whatever the drift of the story, you are happy, you are sad, you are compassionate one moment, you feel cruel the next moment because of the character, what the characters do, or you feel informed, you feel empowered, and so on. It's a very personal thing.
Okay.
That's what, so.
Yeah, Prof, you're a professor of English. I read your books with much passion. And in one of the books, I don't know if it's Fine Lines or Fools, there's a long introduction about how you stumble across a box of books and how you get captured, if you forgive the term, and get carried away. But that's not what Nick is talking about. Nick is talking about a bureaucratic intervention. Nick is talking about a political intervention. In other words, we will get kids to read. That's very different from stumbling across books, loving the act of reading. So I'd like to come back to you. Can one actually have a political or policy position on something that should naturally be, every morning, every Saturday morning at 8:30, I read to my 3-year-old granddaughter in the north of New Zealand. Okay, and we just read this week a book about a girl with frizzy hair, Bianca Flanders' book on loving your hair. I've never before seen a child at 3 years old, so for 20 minutes, absolutely sitting, and after reading to her this past weekend, she wanted to climb through the screen to give her grandparents a hug. That's a very different notion of reading, from this very stylized political intervention. How do we get kids to stumble into reading as an enjoyment? I think that was Vuyokazi's point. I want to come back to that just now. Noncedo, you are actually somebody who does real work in education with Equal Foundation. You don't just talk policy and stuff. You guys move, you shift the needle. And I want to just say this first of all, that I have huge admiration for the work that you do in Equal Education. I spoke to you yesterday about doing something together on the photography of inequality, because I don't know how to convince the middle classes and the government that it is obscene to have schools within a few kilometers of each other. Just spoke at a school last week with not an aquarium, an aqua something that costs millions and millions of rands. And then 10 minutes later, I'm at a school with nothing. So you actually do stuff. Let me ask you, why reading?
So there are a couple of young folk on the reading panel, and we had a lot of fun yesterday because we were thinking about this idea of coming to the reading panel and to the discussion today with this idea around the politics of hope. So we are robustly and radically committed to building a capable state and using education, the sector, and our schooling communities across the country as a spaces to realize that. And that's why reading. So Nick showed us namhlanje that reading has been announced. There's a political commitment to seeing change in early grade reading in the foundation phase of our education system. One government is clear on the volatility of our system just generally, but we're also clear that the foundation phase in particular, through reading, could be a place of great intervention. And so the reason we're here, and I want about who are inside philanthropy, so as well, to not feel, and Colin, not to feel despondent about the contributions to this issue or the problem, because our role as civil society, our role as young people in the education sector is to keep pushing the needle, because it is moving, just very slowly. And so what we're proposing are urgent interventions that need an all-hands-on-deck approach. So why reading? Because it's been announced. There are proposed programs, but not moving fast enough. And what we're trying to do, and call for, and you do say we do real work, is advocacy strategy, grassrooted, involves the full school community, shifts culture quite radically, but it's going to need everyone in the room to join the party. And so that's why we're here.
Yeah. Again, thank you for what you do. I want to ask Bobby this question because you're the money man. You understand how money works compared to us professors. There's been much talk yesterday. I listened very carefully. I didn't participate yesterday because I thought there was so much wisdom in the room, and I wanted to listen to my other panelists. But there's been much talk about the need for well-funded interventions on reading. I actually don't think I'm convinced about that. I think Nico's got this completely wrong. I don't think our problem is money. You know that we spend more money on education, both as a percentage of GDP and as a slice of the national budget. That's a fact, than most countries on the continent, and so on. But we get the worst results, regardless, on numeracy and literacy. Bobby, how do we turn resources into results?
I'm not sure, by the way. I'm increasingly coming to the view that money and national budgeting is a problem. And I'm of the view, I mean, if you look at per capita spending in South Africa on education over, I think, the last decade, this is an area, it appears that as we've hit a kind of debt crunch and a resources crunch, that education has been viewed as a relatively soft target. So that's the first thing to register. What I agree, and I'm struck by our chairs reminding us of the AIDS crisis. And I think there are a few other lessons that we need to tease out. I mean, not that she was suggesting, but it wasn't that the government suddenly woke up one morning and said, age is the problem. There was a massive divide in the society. There was a civil war of sentiment about age. And the change in the graphs came from embracing ARVs. So it was a problem that had a solution. And eventually society, and I would just remind the Deputy President that some companies broke the law before the law was changed and administered ARVs. So, you know, energy, defiance, and finding a few critical solutions. I mean, it's not the same as ARV, but how can a primary school kid not have a reader? How could, that's something. Surely we can say, enough. Surely we can say, let our president fix this at Sona when he's in the Cape Town City Hall. That's something that we can do. And you know, it's the doing of those things, that's what a democracy is about, by the way. It's not about voting every 5 years. It's about citizens feeling they have the power to find something and to do it. So it's not only money, but it may also be money, by the way, and it's certainly budgets. I mean, to put your money where your mouth is a good challenge for business, but it's an even better challenge for the state.
Yeah. Vuyokazi, do you have any views on that? How we can turn resource, you're in a part of the country which is largely rural, where the needs are very emphatic, you know, very visible, you can see it. How do we turn resources into results in a context where there clearly is huge developmental challenges?
Yes. I'm happy that you're mentioning the issue of the rural space, because money alone won't change anything. But I think what needs to happen is engagement, proper engagement by the funders to the funded, as well as commitment as to say what is our common goal. Instead, for example, of throwing money, standing back, and there is no kind of accountability as to how the money has been used, and as well as measuring impact of how the money or the resources were used. So I think the key point I'm trying to make here is whether there's funding. Yes, it's not money only. There should be funding, but there must be some kind of commitment, both parties, as well as accountability. And talking about the divide between the urban space and the rural space, you'll find that some of the interventions, particularly with regard to literacy and reading, most of them, I'm not saying all of them, most of them are around the urban areas. And we tend to forget the deep rural areas of Mkanqwa, and so on. And I think we have to ensure, I think we have to have a conversation as to say, how do we reach all South African children, those in the urban space and those in the deep rural areas? And not only stop there, try to measure the impact of whatever kind of intervention that has been there, and made it known to the communities. And I think if we were to take that kind of a strategy, that would also mean engaging with our communities to ensure that our communities are part of what we want to achieve. Yeah. It's not a case of a top-down that we want to do this, so we engage with our communities. They must also have a space or a voice in terms of how we can do together, particularly when it comes to reading. So I think there needs to be some kind of investment into our communities, particularly the rural communities. And there should be follow-ups as to say, how can we be together and how can we own the sense of ownership? How can we own those projects that we are having in these various areas with regard to reading? And then we can go as a collective so that all the South Africans, all the children, all the parents could be forming what we would call a community of practice. And I would really like to say from a community of practice to a community of parents, because those parents up there or down there need to be educated about the value of reading.
Right. Yes, my difficulty, can somebody get a mic to our chairperson, to Phumzile, please, because I want to come to her in a minute, but I first want to ask the other two panelists. So as I said, one of the things I fret over is how do you actually make change happen? And I suppose as one gets older, the urgency of wanting to see our schools change becomes even more, it weighs on you, I discover. And I don't get depressed ever, but I do get depressed when I have to live with these realities of children being shortchanged. So one of the things is very clear. Nick Spall did a fantastic presentation to us yesterday on the panel, in which he mentioned in passing something I believe in, which is the importance of politics. I don't mean politics in the sense of the nonsense we have to deal with here. I mean politics as a virtue, politics as something that can move the needle, because you can have the best technical toolbox. If you don't have a national strategy for reading, okay, then you will always show up less capable in delivery than a Cuba or an Iran. Not exactly my examples of democratic states, but nevertheless, centralized government, communist economies, and they drive Nicaragua with the literacy campaigns those days. They drive a strategy for change. We talk a good game. South Africans talk. I listened to this, even the talks today. We are good. I mean, this is like church for me. But it doesn't change a fucking thing on the ground unless you have a strategy for change. Now, Phumzile, you are somebody I look up to, as you know, greatly. You were our deputy president. Why are we still talking about this stuff today? Why was there not the political energy? You know what I mean? You did more. I mean, you accomplished much more with the, when I first met you with the foundation, than what what our government achieved. Why is there not the sense? When I listen to the president talk about bullet trains, I live next to a bloody train line. There are houses, shacks built on the train line. Where's this bullet train? We talk a good game, We have aspirational visions. But on the ground, nothing changes. Why isn't there at the moment, you know it better than any of us, a politics that says we're going to drive a national reading strategy at the highest level, and then it happens, as you know. Could you give us some insight?
Sure. I think we need this audience to help us move the needle. I don't think it was ever meant to be something that government will do alone, but it's even worse after what we have seen has happened, something that we have shared about the last few years. So I really don't want to go there. I think we have to move forward. And one thing that I'm clearest about is that it's not going to move if people who are outside government are not in it. People have always been there working in all the sectors of society to assist government, but there was a time when government maybe was not accepting people's help to the extent that we needed to do that. So right now, I am just begging everybody, if we don't go back, it's not gonna work. So, it's not the best answer, but can give me some marks.
I'll definitely give you some marks. Thank you for being courageous with that. Prof, what kind of politics do we need to be able to move the needle? Because the problem is, as much as I agree with Phumzile, we all need to be involved, and all the people here, I can assure you, are in their respective corners of the vineyard, they are involved. That's why they're here. But to get systemic change, you see, what you and I do, what I do at Zwelatemba right now in Worcester with schools that we're working at, and we had disappointing results. What I do is, and what you do with schools all over, is important, but it doesn't change the system for 26,000 schools. For that, you do need a government, as you know. What kind of politics gets us there, Prof?
Well, I don't know what kind of politics, but I think that I'm reminded of what was said earlier on about, I think it was the chairperson who said, we have to, forget what it was about oh yes, we are going back to the normal schooling. Now, I think that's great. But the question is, what do we feel as South African citizens that going back to normal schooling is something that we so intensely desire that we leave this room and say we are starting something new? I think that what countries need to do successfully is a political imagination that is shared by the greatest number of citizens in any particular country. But that is so aspirational that it galvanizes energies of people in different ways, that everyone becomes good at recognizing the collective challenge and then individually saying, what can I make a contribution to it in the best possible way from my own perspective? And the political environment, and I'm not talking about political parties, I'm talking about the political environment that we need, is one, I believe, in which there is such a broad and urgent consensus that we're all going to be devoted to making that consensus work. And that the best possible way of it is not about being forced, about rules, and rules are very important, but about self-management of self that is translated into the self-management of the collective. And we've got to work towards that. I don't see how we can get out of this. This is one more thing to mention. I think that when we were shocked by the last June or July's insurrection, where did we see the greatest reaction? It came from individual communities. And we suddenly discovered that, hey, we have communities. That is not government as such, but how communities see the challenge, and then, but beyond the community, then you scale up to the national community. And how do you get there?
Yeah, that's very insightful, because we have to keep reminding us, as Mzile was also suggesting, we didn't change this country because of the government that was in charge at the time. It was the people who got behind it. I take that. Noncedo, you work at the coalface. You work with what? I know you guys often use the legal strategy to get the attention of the minister to do things that should be obvious to any decent person. What is your sense of the kind of grassroots politics that might get us over the line?
Yeah. So I ended off by talking about how we need sort of an all-hands-on-deck approach, and that advocacy that's grassrooted and grounded in school communities is going to be crucial, because that sustains the work, right? I'm in equal education. We've been advocating for school infrastructure. There's a policy and norms and standards. Everyone in the department is clear, is aware. Provincial departments of education have departments that deal with that specifically. Well, not Limpopo, but that's a story for another day. But we still have plain pit latrines in schools in rural provinces in this country. We still have schools that aren't electrified. We still have schools that have issues with water security, you know? So I suggest this to go with everyone in the room, the full ecosystem is necessary. So Prof. Nomlomo says we need to give some kind of ownership to school communities. I mean, it's not even a joke, you know, and we have to find ways then to do that work. I've got two things to say just in response to that question, the kinds of politics we'll need. I'll come back to this like grassroots story just now. But the first thing is that I think we need to be committed, and then I'm looking at friends inside the DBE as well, to an anti-austerity agenda. I think we need to be clear that we need to push our government and people that are in some political leadership and powerful institutions to allow for social spending to increase in South Africa. Now more than ever, it's incredibly urgent. And I think the COVID, so that's the one thing, right? Spending inside of the Department of Education nationally has been on the decline over the last 10 years. The allocation per learner spending has been decreasing. And what this means, I was in schools in the Eastern Cape, I spent a lot of time inside the rural context as well. And principals were saying, I've gotten my budget, I'm buying school nutrition items today, we've been open for a week and a half, but no one said to me that the budget's decreased. So I'm having to choose between fixing the printer, buying food, or getting additional LTSM, because something is gonna rise. And that's the reality of what we're working up against. So we're patted against quite severe issues. And the COVID pandemic, together with austerity, is further challenging those spaces. Yeah? So I just want to put it out there. I think it's urgent that government officials, our friends inside of this room, must help us run this work from a professional place while we do the advocacy. So that's one thing. The second thing, and I'll go back to the grassroots now, is that when we think about what the ground wants, and I'm going to use the language I use inside of my own work, yeah? The ground is fertile. People during the response to this COVID pandemic were ready to see alternatives and get themselves physically involved in those kinds of formations. Katie from Ndebele, we were in a thematic that did work on basic education for the C19 People's Coalition. And many people were going, drop the education system, our communities are ready to hold spaces. Yeah? But so even if that's the notion, we must be very worried about the kind of trust and legitimacy that our departments of education, the education sector holds in the country. It means that the issues that we're identifying, children and youth, aren't being sort of, there's an English word to go as the, there isn't a Kosovo word even. I've lost both languages. So people don't trust the schooling system, and they think when there's crisis, it's an opportunity for them to do it themselves. Yeah? So it's up to us to sort of capitalize and use that energy to progressively work to something together. And we've made some recommendations as this panel. So I think we can move from that forward.
Thank you so much.
I'm actively mobilizing you.
I'm joining your campaign. Could you give that mic to Eleanor Sisulu? Oh, you put up your hand. No, Eleanor, I've got a question for you. I don't want you to speak. I have a question for you to speak to. That's why I want to stand. Eleanor, one of the things we share is a love for Zimbabwe. And you know, I mean, I can tell you now, I would hire a Zimbabwean teacher without a CV. You know, because they have a standard in math and science that is second to none. And as you know, if you go into Soweto, for example, and you look at all the schools with the high math and science marks, they are obvious, there's often a Zimbabwean teacher. What did they get right with basic things like reading that we're not getting right?
Okay, I think, yeah, that's a complex thing, but I think one thing, Zimbabwe never had Bantu education. There was a problem of quality, but not quantity. So a Zimbabwean child could have go to a rural school in a hut, but the quality of the curriculum, what they were getting, would be the same as the child in private school. So I went to University of Zimbabwe, and of course the only difference between children from private schools and children from rural schools were the accents. But in terms of delivery of the English, it was the same. I mean, we had very rural people. One used to buy cattle with every payout. And clearly, I mean, culturally, there was a difference. But in terms of the language that was delivered, and I think Zimbabwe had a high level of, well, one primary school curriculum for one. They didn't have 14 education departments. So there was a uniformity. And then also, one of the good things that Robert Mugabe did, people know that I'm not a person who will easily praise Mugabe, but one of the good things that there was a huge investment in increasing the quality of education between 1980 and 1985. There was a good use of resources to double up teaching, etc. The only problem is they educated people and they didn't want to give them the political voice. So, but Zimbabwe is benefiting because people, Zimbabweans all over the world are sending remittances. And in fact, people are actually surviving on the dividend from that education. But what I wanted to say, Prof, I disagree with you profoundly about saying money is not the problem. I think money is the problem. Money is spent, but the problem may be that it's the way money is used.
Right.
I mean, if you're going to spend 700 million on tablets instead of 700 million on people, I think our governments confuse austerity with being frugal. We need to be anti-austerity, but we must be pro a government being frugal. And huge amounts have been spent on education, but it has not been spent as frugally and with imagination. And I think, Nick, one of the discussions we had yesterday, and Judy pointed out, what is the cost of not doing this work? What is the cost of not having children being able to read? And I can't make a direct causal link, but I would say some of the damage caused in Fees Must Fall, that is part of the cost. What happened in July, that is part of the cost. The xenophobic violence, that is part of the cost. I can't make a direct causal link, and of course, I'm sure there's academics somewhere that have researched this, but I think common sense tells me that South Africa is paying a very heavy price. Yeah. And that the fact that children around the region are learning with less input to read at a higher level, and what happens when those children come from Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe, come into this education market, and you have South Africans who can't compete. And I think part of the answer to this strong xenophobia in our society lies in that.
Okay.
But money is the problem because, and I think I must reference the Bua Lit Collective, the work they do on multilingual literacies, and that there are many pathways to literacy. And one of them is recognizing the role of language. And Nick yesterday, and I think you should put that slide up again. If you say 70% of our children are learning from grade 1 to 3 in mother language, and we don't have books in those languages, we don't have budget for people to work in their languages, we don't have the budgets for people to work in reading, and for reading professionals to make a living, then money is a problem.
You're right. I have to just come back to the panel if you don't mind. That was very inspiring. You are the one Sisulu I would like to see run for president. Sorry, I I wrote Nick a note last night, or yesterday morning, on the one thing that I do know something about, and that is that reading happens in a context. And we don't talk about the context. And I'm not talking about outside of school, I'm talking about inside of school. The others is too hairy to deal with. But we can deal with what happens inside of schools. And I don't know when last you've been inside a South African classroom or South African school. But let me tell you what I see for consistently, before 94, after 94. I see a very low level of energy among the teachers. The only place I see high energy is in the privileged Afrikaans schools. That's why they put up these 16 white boys in a huge picture from Bloemhof, the girls, and from Paul boys. And there's no sense of shame on their part or on our part, you know, about that. But that's a consequence of a mini system that works. Low energy, for good reason very often. Absenteeism among teachers, no driving principal force, a leader that drives the school's culture of reading and everything else. Unpredictable timetables. You may show up, it doesn't mean you're teaching. This is stuff you'll see in many of our schools. You can't have reading in a context that is depressed, in an organizational context that is depressed. How do we change that? Because you can have a really fantastic reading program, but unless you have the leadership of Ndebele in Thohoyandou, or the leadership, the schools, COSAT in Khayelitsha, unless you have a leadership that creates a different culture that enables reading. There's a school, by the way, if any of you want to see the one school in South Africa that drives a reading program every single minute, it's a school in Grassy Park called Kanamea Primary. Please go there. From the moment you come through the gate, you are told about reading. The principal reads. The kids read every single day, and it's a school that doesn't have much. Do you know what I'm saying? How does one create those cultures of reading in places where you're not even guaranteed the teachers would show up? And once the panels had a bite at that, I want to come to Prof. Sizwe because he's getting away with murder, sitting right in front here, and we're not asking him about teacher training at one of our top universities. Shall we start with you this time on that one, then go that way? Cultures of reading within schools, how do you build those things?
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like an abstract question, but what it also needs, and I also reflect on it not just as an education activist, but also as a teacher. I mean, I'm not inside the classroom or in school now because I found the space so stringent. And so the ability to retain young teachers who's got this kind of energy is also something to think about, and it's intrinsic in the culture of the schooling community. But it's about resourcing. The reason that we lack that kind of energy inside schools and an ability to, inside like curriculum pacing, and all the things that we're worried about, lesson plans for an overcrowded classroom, because of the battered teachers who are tired inside the system, you end up taking on more classes than should be taken for.
Yeah.
So the kind of administrative work to then back that up, and the fact that you're probably chasing a class of 60 learners that are really behind in their capacity to comprehend the mathematics of the grade 8 class. It also boils down to, I think Prof. Fleisch calls it the triple cocktail. So it's about infrastructure, the resourcing and the capacities to support teachers inside of the classroom. So at the schools I've been to, Prof, still have green boards. They still have broken windows. Three learners are still sharing tables, especially in primary schools, because they're small. They packed into a classroom to ensure that everyone's got an opportunity to be inside an education facility. But with that said, we've asked as a panel a clear recommendation to go, can we get the norms of those RTSMs in place, at least by the end of this year, to make sure that each learner and teacher has the privilege or pleasure of making sure, or knowing that every learner in the classroom at least has some kind of resource to keep working and gaining the acumens around reading. And so it's a big resourcing question.
Right.
That's the thing that influences energy and culture in school.
And I think the very important thing that I think you're drawing our attention to is the teachers didn't just become that way out of their own. There were things that led to this kind of... I'm going to ask the panel, Nick would like me to get into the Q&A with the audience. Yesterday, again, sitting with the panel, everybody had an idea about something that had to change, and that's not how things change with everything being a problem. You normally sort of say, what are the 2 or 3 things that can shift the needle here? And I'd like to ask each of you, and we'll go this way this time, in conclusion, if you had to, just think about this for a minute, you had to choose one thing, okay, that can move the needle here instead of having another talk shop on reading outcomes. What would that be? But before I go there, Prof. Mabizela, you are a very famous mathematician. You are a university vice chancellor of one of our top universities. The city of Makanda is, to be honest with you, a disgrace. I don't know what the municipality does there, but there are more potholes there than in the Free State, which tells you a lot. But but you have this gift of a university that does teach education. What is it that the university can do in preparing teachers, given Nick's stats on the inadequacy, the shortfalls in the B.Ed program, to improve outcomes in areas such as reading?
Thank you very much, Jonathan. I want to link that question to a critically important question, which was raised by Sis Yvonne. How can we make teaching an exciting career option for young people? How can we attract the best and the brightest in our society into the teaching profession? How can we make teaching a respectable profession in our society? And we can all think back to that one teacher who made it so exciting for us to be in class. And if we accept the centrality of a teacher in the learning enterprise, how then do we ensure that they are properly trained, adequately equipped, and supported to discharge their responsibilities? I think a point has been made regarding the training of the teachers. And I think the panel looked at this, and we do need to engage the deans of education. We need to engage the CHE on this so that teachers who qualify at the end of their 4-year B.Ed program are adequately equipped to teach reading. That takes me to the issue of resource planning on the part of DHET. They invested huge amounts in Funza Lushaka. And the sad aspect of it is that many young people who graduate, having been funded by the taxpayers of this country, they complete their degrees in education, they cannot be placed. And after a certain period of time, they are freed from the obligation of teaching. And worse still, someone would have qualified for senior phase teaching, and they are placed to teach at foundation phase. They don't have the wherewithal to do what is required at foundation phase. If we can't build a solid foundation for the young people of this country, without a solid foundation in reading and numeracy, their futures are destroyed. And so we will engage, we will look at the curricula that are provided to people who are supposed to teach foundation phase. We will have to ask the question, are we adequately preparing them to teach young people how to read, and not just read, but read for meaning? And that, I think, is critically important. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Bobby, shall we start with you? One or two things that could move the needle.
I just echo those words. I want to restore the teacher to the winning platform in our society. So when we admire not CEOs, not just sportsperson, so certainly not TikTok, okay, but to say this is the prime instrument for nation building. If we want to realize the rainbow, and we want to go back to the cues of '94, or we want to go back to the excitement of 2010, it's the teacher. We want the very best and brightest people in teaching, and we want teachers to be revered by their local communities and honored. That's the change I want.
Thank you for that. Prof.
I agree. Prof, I think for me, the one thing, in addition to the so many that have been mentioned by my colleagues, the one thing that I think would also be very important is to realize that schools are placed within communities. And you'll find that in certain communities, there is a close link. The community members have a close link with the schools. But in many, many others, they see schools as just a space where just to send my child for the 6 hours or 8 hours. So how can we bridge that gap where we make schools part of the community and we make the community part of the school, so that there is some kind of close interaction, you know, so that they don't see a bridge to say that it's us and them, it's the school and us. That kind of collaboration, I think for me that is very, very important, because even the societal issues around the schools like gangsterism, GBVs, and so on, all of them come and manifest themselves in schools. And if we can work with our communities and be one with one common goal, I think that can take us further.
Thank you, ma'am. Prof. Ndebele.
Well, I'll end on agree with what's been said on a rather personal note. When I was growing up in a township in the East Rand, one thing that made me suffer was a subject called arithmetic. And because I was always at the bottom of the class. And my father would give me extra lessons and so on. It just didn't work. I mean, I would cry sometimes. But a miracle occurred when I was what you'd call grade 11 today, but it was Form 4 those days.
Yes.
Along came the guardian angel, Ubabu Tishal Khadebe, who was teaching arithmetic, not mathematics.
Yeah.
He was so good that at the end of that year, where I was always close to the bottom, I won a mathematics award. I mean, he was so good. I even made it to the small group that he created, that he said, you boys are so good, as a boys' school in Swaziland. You boys are so good, I want to have extra lessons for you, what he called additional mathematics. So what I learned there was from him, was suddenly I saw mathematics as a language I could speak, that you can think, when you have a problem, you imagine the solution in a particular way through the knowledge you have and your ability to apply that knowledge to solve something that it was so engaging. I've never forgotten him as a sort of a model teacher. I'm sure we have come across teachers like those.
Yeah.
So the question is, what is it? It's not so much what makes them so, but I think your question is, how does someone like that is multiplied? And it's I think I spoke about the writing of. It's a language, you know, that you master, mathematics, and I think that goes for all subjects. It's knowing the way you think in a particular subject and mastering that art of thinking, and you get to solve a lot of things. And everyone can become a scientist. Everyone can become a biologist or whatever the case might be. I think it's about finding that. But lastly, but very quickly, I was inspired by, I think that one of the greatest challenges we face in South Africa, we have not addressed this. What do we want to do about the townships? I mean, I grew up in a township. I go back when I visit my relatives in Duduza. I still find, there's some place, because this is a Zulu section, Sotho section. What on earth today? But beyond that is that life was much better, my impression, in the old days than now. how do people, and I mean that in the real sense of the sense of social security. Never mind the politics about apartheid and so on, but there was a greater sense of social security. So I visit my young grandchildren, my sister's children, and I'm pained by that. They go to school, but there isn't the spark and the desire to do something, the fascination to go to school. That is so. And I wonder what it's like across the townships in the country. The sense of, you said the culture of reading. I'm thinking about the culture of social living, where things are connected. There's a butchery there, there is a park there, there is a school over there, there's a hall over there, and there's an ambulance clinic there. The sense of connectedness, that you live in a spatial environment that supports you, and you feed it to it. So if millions of South Africans live in such spaces, it's difficult to imagine how day to day the aspiration to be a citizen is fed by this kind of environment. And that takes us back to the question of imagining the society and then making it real through your efforts.
I saw Sizwe getting very excited when you talked about mathematics as a reading. And I think, by the way, Nick, that's probably one of the most powerful reasons to read. It's not just reading for the subject reading. It is that it gives you skills across many disciplines. Thank you for that so much. And the last word to you.
I think it did, Prof. Inside equal education, I see a lot of that, where learners come in with other kind of enthusiasm around being young inside a learning environment, but through sort of the conscious socio-political content we run in the space created, they become revitalized, it's wholesome. And so they go back into the school community quite different. And you can hear teachers go, hey, these children, they cause nonsense here because they will occupy a principal's office, but they're also quite positive role models to their peers, a kind of an understanding that you can become more than your environment, So those kinds of energies are definitely needed in schools. To add mixer to the cocktail, I'm sorry to keep referencing alcohol at this early hour, but I think my one thing would be interministerial, interdepartmental cooperation. Friends of the DBE here, let's go find each other, DPME, National Treasury, Department of Social Development. When we say all hands on deck, government needs to do better in that regard, and I think you can all agree. So that would be my chaser.
What an amazing panel. A round of applause, please.